Welcome back to Progressively Older. January 6th, 2021.
A date which will live in infamy.
A day of infamy indeed. Tomorrow, Congress will meet in a joint session to certify the electoral college votes of the states in the presidential election of 2020. Typically a ceremonial event, the Constitution does allow for objection by each house of Congress. If one senator and one representative both object to the voting on the electoral college, they adjourn and have a 2-hour session of argument and discussion and take a vote, each house individually, to certify the election. At least 12 senators will object tomorrow, and 140 or more representatives from the House. And they will go into that 2-hour session, and they will have the debate. And in the end, the Democrats will kill it, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be certified as the next president and vice president of the United States. So how serious was the GOP in trying to upend all of this? Well, Representative Louis Gohmert of where else? Texas, filed a lawsuit against Vice President Mike Pence, trying to upend the 1887 Electoral Count Act, which back then formalized the idea that the vice president's role in this meeting of Congress was essentially ceremonial, just blessing the results and going on our merry way. Well, Gohmert's suit was thrown out on its keister. The Trump-appointed judge said that he had no standing to bring the case, and so it was thrown out. Gohmert then called the flock, his legion of followers and the Trump followers, the Trump base, he called to them to go to the streets in violence. I quote, he said, "But bottom line is the court is saying we're not going to touch this. You have no remedy. Basically, in effect, the ruling would be that you got to go to the streets and be as violent as Antifa and BLM." Yeah, that's what Gohmert said. So then, or actually prior to that, pro-Trump lawyer L. Lynn Wood became famous in a press conference in Georgia where he pleaded for the Republican voter of Georgia to stay home in the runoff election for the last 2 Senate seats that would determine the balance of power of national government. He suggested that until the fraud of the election could be meted out, could be ferreted out from the process, that they shouldn't support the whole process itself, that they should boycott it. How this would help the Republican Party is a mystery to everybody that's heard it. It's still a mystery. After doing that, though, he also mentioned or seemingly concocted a new conspiracy theory, which suggested that Mike Pence, the Vice President of the United States, Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate, and Chief Justice John Roberts of the Supreme Court were a cabal that were conspiring to overturn the election of the rightfully elected Donald Trump. Not sure how two of those, at the very least, had everything to thank Donald Trump for in the meteoric rise of their power during this administration. But he accused them of treason and actually suggested that they should be executed. The calls for violence have been continuous throughout the administration of Donald Trump. He suggested that people that protested at his rallies should meet violent reprisal, and that he would bail out the people that would mete out that violence and pay for their court fees and take care of them. This has been encouraged. This has been he in speaking to law enforcement people, he said there really wasn't any need to put your hand on top of the head of a suspect when putting them into a police car. You didn't have to do that. That's just bang them on the head. This has been a constant theme throughout the entire administration, over and over and over again, and it has grown and grown and grown. As the Proud Boys went to Charlottesville and ultimately murdered a woman there marching for peace, he said that there were good people on both sides. You know all these stories, and I can go on and on. There's so much of it. It's humiliating. Several permits have been applied for and approved by Washington, D.C., by groups as diverse as the Proud Boys, the 80% Coalition. 3%ers will undoubtedly be represented as well. These rallies were not exactly homegrown. These rallies were created, invented, and fomented by the President of the United States. He announced these rallies, announcing them that they would start at 11 o'clock in the morning, locations to be announced. There was nothing there yet. He invented it. He called them the Save the Steel rallies, and he promised they would be wild. This is egregious. This has created a situation where over 15,000 people are expected on the streets of Washington, D.C. Now, both open and concealed carry of firearms is forbidden in Washington, D.C. During protests such as these. Things that of this nature that happen in the nation's capital tend to have a pretty significant political tilt to them, whether it was the Women's March right after the inauguration of President Trump, or whether it's this one at his demise. But it is forbidden. And the chatter on the internet, intercepted by from the Proud Boys and others, is that that's going to be contended. They're considering having their firearms with them and brandishing their Second Amendment rights on the streets of the nation's capital in spite of the regulations against it. We can only hope that this doesn't become something that turns into a disaster, something that is a trail of tears through the nation's capital. It certainly has terrible possibilities. The police have created strategies and are deploying in great numbers to try and maintain the safety and order of the nation's capital and protect the people of the capital during these protests. And they will be widely on display. They will be quite noticeable on the streets along with the protesters. One of the challenges that they are facing is that the brand new chief of police was just sworn in 4 days ago on Saturday. Good luck, sir. and welcome to the nation's capital. The current tally of the lawsuits that the administration has brought to try and overturn the election results, it stands at 1-60. They have won one in Pennsylvania, and they have lost 60 cases across the country in various states. None of them were close. They were not. They were thrown out either on the basis of a lack of standing, which means that the people bringing the lawsuit had no business bringing them in the first place, or for lack of evidence, that there was no there. In several cases, the attorneys made the case that they would have the evidence at the time of the trial, that they couldn't show anything right now, but trust us, we'll have it when we start the trial. Those were thrown out as well. Judges were appointed by Democrats. Judges were appointed by Republicans. Judges were appointed by Trump, and that's a whole separate category from Democrat or Republican. All of them decided not to sacrifice their own legal reputations and careers on the altar of Trumpism. They maintained the law, to their credit, and we all owe them a great deal of thanks. Shouldn't need to, should be an automatic, shouldn't be anything of great heroic significance. They'll be remembered as heroes. So we don't really know what the justification for the rallies are. There seems to be none at all. The phone call from the President of the United States to the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, is historic. This will never be forgotten. This will be studied in history books forever. It is a nadir in American politics. The idea that we actually elected a person that would make this phone call is stunning and disgusting. On the phone call, the President of the United States attempted to extort votes from the Secretary of State of Georgia. And to Secretary Raffensperger's credit, he did not buckle down. It turns out that he had a line, one that he wouldn't cross. That was actually very surprising because he was the Secretary of State in Georgia that reduced the number of polling places and caused the disenfranchisement of thousands and thousands of people by reducing their ability to vote, to get to voting places. He was not one of the good guys that was working for the greater good. He was a party political tool. He was one of the gang. But in the end, he had a line, something that Donald Trump doesn't have. How many times have we said, where's the bottom? And we always find out that there's no bottom. There isn't one. It just continues to descend and descend and descend. On this phone call, the President of the United States said he only needed 11,780 votes. That was one more than he really needed, and that's all he was asking. Was that such a big deal? Why was this such an issue? He was simply talking. It's amazing listening to the phone call because you honestly can't tell. It almost sounds like the president actually believes what he's spewing. He brings out every conspiracy theory, every voting fraud conspiracy theory that was tossed out of every court in the country. And he brings them out as if they were true. And one after the other, the secretary says, no, Mr. President, your facts are wrong. You got it wrong. That's the problem. You don't have good information. And it actually sounds like the president believes this nonsense, that he actually has bought into the conspiracy theories that have been concocted to try and do the Hail Mary save of this failed presidency. It's stunning. If he doesn't believe it, the only other thing that you can hear and make sense of in this phone call is that he's talking to someone that is on the inside and should understand that this is the playbook. Get on the team, run the play. And the secretary stoically refuses. Pretty incredible phone call. What you're seeing in real time or real listening time on that phone call is a coup or an attempt at a coup of the United States of America, an overthrow of the will of the people. You're listening to a criminal act and you're watching history, a stain on American history that will never wash off. It will be there permanently. Now, this is my prediction. In Congress, there'll be a dirty dozen in the Senate who will rise up and object to certifying the Electoral College vote. Now, it started by being led by Josh Hawley of Missouri, Senator Josh Hawley. It was clear that this young firebrand was trying to make a name for himself, a niche within the party, and rise above the also-rans within the party. Be a senator of note. Well, this did not go unnoticed by Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz of, you guessed it, Texas. This was a threat to him. This was all politics. This has nothing to do with governance, nothing to do with running the country at all. Ted Cruz felt threatened by Senator Hawley. Senator Hawley was trying to position himself for the 2024 go-round for president and put himself in the good stead of the Trump base, which what will happen to them over the next 4 years is a big unknown. But very quickly, Ted Cruz started making a lot of noise. And with a bigger name than Josh Hawley, he soon took over the perceived leadership of the Dirty Dozen. So he became the Lee Marvin of the group, a poor man's Lee Marvin. So at any rate, they will object. There are going to be over 140. If it gets to 144, there will be a gross of representatives that object to certifying the vote. And they will go out and they will debate. And the pushback will be from others that are also trying to position themselves for 2024 races. Mitt Romney and Ben Sasse on the Republican side are going to be the voice of reason. And this is the big split. The Dirty Dozen and Ben and Mitt and whoever else decides to throw their hat in with them. It seems like there's a growing number of senators that are coming out to say that they will support the vote. So this is the great split in the GOP. That's what's going to happen, and what kind of consequences that has for the party going forward is anyone's guess. On the streets outside, the demonstrations will become violent as the results roll in. The violence will grow. How greatly? That's the only question we have. How great is the chaos going to be? Are the police going to be seen as targets, as the defenders of the deep state? Will the far right-wing protesters on the street turn their ire against the people that they can get their hands on right in front of them, the blue line? Nobody knows this. No, we can imagine what they're capable of. They're going to confirm what they're capable of tomorrow. God help us all. It's a frightening proposition. These rallies, these demonstrations, they will start the violence. They won't end it. It'll be the beginning of a theme. And then we have to decide what we do with domestic terrorism. That's coming up in 2021. The GOP may split into two competing parties, completely separate from each other. There's one part of the Republican Party right now that wants to remain a governing force, part of the mix, part of the sharing of ideas and the competing of ideas for policy and lawmaking. The other just wants to burn it down to the ground. When the Trump administration came into their power, Steve Bannon was one of the primary advisors to President Trump. And this is exactly what he said their intention was to do. They said that they, in order to rebuild the government of the United States, they first had to burn it to the ground. His words. Well, they've done a hell of a job. They've done a great job. And standing right at the confluence of these two competing factions of the party stands Mike Pence. Where will he go? What will he do? Louis Gohmert has tried to make him a demigod within government, that he could, on a dime, switch everything over and just decide to throw the Electoral College vote down into the gutter. I guess he could try. That would be a coup, folks. Don't call it anything else. There is nothing else to call it. It would be a coup of the United States of America. Or he can do what Al Gore did in 2001 when he was vice president. He had to take that moment and announce to the world that George Bush and Dick Cheney had been elected as the president and vice president of the United States. And he did. It's on you, Mike Pence. It's all in your hands now. So history will record this day as a reckoning. There are a lot of things all coming together and going to crash into each other. And something's going to come out standing. But history will never forget it. They're going to read about this forever. It was the moment that the United States averted fascism. Not defeated it, merely averted it. This is still a danger. We now know that the possibility is there because there are people, our neighbors, our friends, our families, who will go down that road, that'll jump in the rabbit hole and abandon every element of what we decided we were going to stand for when we became a country. Throw it all away for power. Almost half of us, 7 million out of 350, that's not a huge win. Politically it is. It's pretty darn significant. But in the bigger picture, my God, folks, look how many of us were willing to abandon every piece of our credibility, every piece of our reason for power. They'll never forget it. The textbooks will always remember this moment. America needs to remember this moment. The danger was considerable, and it still remains something to be defeated, not just averted. I'm Link. This is Progressively Older.